All right, I am ready to ruffle some feathers today with the conversation around SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and diet. Hey guys, I am Dr. Arland Hill, and today we're going to take a look at the diet and one specific component in the diet that is generally regarded as a no-go when it comes to SIBO, and for many individuals is just taken out of the diet, period, for good measure. But is that really the right avenue to take, and is there much more to this conversation? Well, I think you can see by the direction that I'm going that the answer is going to be yes. So today we're going to delve into dairy and talk about how that may actually not be a problem as it relates to SIBO, but more importantly, how that can actually be an ally when it comes to resolving that overgrowth and keeping it in check. So with that all being said, let's just jump into this. And where does this controversy actually begin from? It's going to begin when we look at what is known as the FODMAPs Diet. And this is a diet based on removing fermentable sources of foods, fermentable carbohydrates. And within that grouping, we're going to see, as the FOD in this name implies, disaccharides, and this is where dairy comes in, because dairy, as many individuals know, contains lactose. That's the sugar that we find in dairy. Lactose is made up of two sugars, galactose and glucose. The point on this, although, is not to delve off too far into the science, is that when we start to look at the disaccharides like lactose, is that it's often labeled as a contributor to the overgrowth and to the symptoms. And maybe there might be some validity in that, right? And so many individuals just take dairy out just not to be concerned about that. But here's what I want to pose some questions around. When we look at lactose, what is the contribution of lactose to dairy? The answer to that is about 2 to 8% of dairy is made up of lactose. So what's the remainder of this? Well, this is where the fats and the protein are going to come into play. And it's really this protein that I want to have some conversation around, because remember, if the idea here with SIBO is that this is a dysbiosis, this is an imbalance of the microbiota in the GI tract, the question is, how do we bring that back under control? Well, part of the answer to that we can utilize to our advantage is going to be related to the protein component in dairy. And this protein component is there's many compounds that are a component to this that are labeled as bioactive peptides. These bioactive peptides can be found in the whey portion of dairy. They can also be found in the casein portion of dairy. Now, I feel like it's important, before I continue to go forward with this, that I make a differentiation here from this point forward. Everything that I'm going to say here forward is going to be related to A2 dairy as compared to A1 dairy. A1 dairy is by far the majority of what you find in the general food supply. Majority is not A2 dairy. So this is again a conversation specific from here forward to A2 dairy. And so the main difference on this is that A2 dairy is going to be different from A1 dairy in that A1 dairy has the capacity to produce something called beta-caseomorphin. And beta-caseomorphin, this component from A1 dairy that presents, can actually act as an opioid receptor agonist. So what that means is that beta-caseomorphin interacts with these opioid receptors. Any of you that have ever dealt with opioid medications know that they can have a negative impact on your gastrointestinal function. They can slow it down. And certainly that should raise a red flag when it comes to an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut. We don't want to slow down motility. We want to keep motility of the bowels at an optimal transit time so that we can move those bacteria and continue to flush those bacteria out, almost have a sweeping motion of those bacteria out of the small intestine into the large intestine, where an overgrowth or an abundance of microorganisms is more normal at. That's a potential problem when it comes to A1. So I acknowledge that, and that's why I want to limit our conversation in terms of benefits for SIBO to A2. So how does it become a benefit? Well, one is it doesn't have that beta-caseomorphin. So we're not running that risk. So that means that these other compounds that we find can show some benefits. So what are these other compounds? Well, these are going to go by such names as lactoferrin, glycomacropeptide, lactalbumin. When you start digging into these molecules, what you'll find with these is that they have a very profound effect on shaping the microbiota and the GI tract. They generally shape it in a more beneficial, sometimes we'll hear that termed as commensal direction. They are going to act as immune system modulators. I hesitate to use the term stimulants. That's not technically accurate, but they act as immune system modulators in that they're going to help the immune system be more competent in its responses. And so when you look at that, that's really the idea of where we are trying to go with a presentation of SIBO, is that we want a more balanced microbial profile. We don't want overstimulation of the immune system, and we would ideally like to have a intake of adequate amounts of glutamine and glutathione precursors, and dairy is a very rich source of these things. Now, I do find it interesting, just kind of as we think about this, so some individuals I'm sure are probably looking at this and maybe even yelling at the screen right now, and that's okay. We can all have differences of opinion here. But it is interesting to note that there is some information out there that shows that individuals, when you look at individuals that have consumed dairy as part of the diet versus comparing against a dairy-free diet, that the individuals that underwent a dairy-free diet had a higher prevalence of SIBO. And so that does raise a red flag here. So just to try to put this information into, I was going to say a digestible mindset, but no pun intended there, but just to put this information in a way where we can practically use it. What this really means is that maybe in the early stages, and this is really how I look at moving forward on this, is that in the early stages, we really limit dairy, but we don't do that for an ongoing basis. So truly within the first 30 days, unless someone can confirm that there's a dairy allergy or a very noteworthy sensitivity, generally there's more advantages to consuming dairy than there is to avoiding dairy. And again, I have to reiterate in this conversation that I'm not talking about all forms of dairy. I'm talking about A2 dairy. Again, I'm not an advocate for A1 dairy. I'm an advocate for A2 dairy, where you don't run the risk of exposure to beta-caseomorphin. So different thought process here. I get that, but one that I'd hate to leave beneficial therapeutic effects on the table when you could actually not only harness those benefits, but you could also drastically expand your diet and have a lot more enjoyment just simply with the food that you're consuming. And also understanding that when you're consuming dairy, that a lot of what you're consuming is protein and fat. Yes, there is a carbohydrate portion there, and that certainly is acknowledged, but you're also consuming some beneficial peptides, some beneficial proteins there, and also those beneficial fats as well, and harnessing their health attributes as well. So hopefully that paints a different picture for you, gives you a different mindset, and also doesn't make you feel so locked in to one dietary strategy. I think that is a limiting factor when we start talking about topics like overgrowth, especially when it comes to SIBO, is that this one dietary strategy is a one size fits all for everybody. And I think anyone that's been in clinical practice for any amount of time recognizes, or should recognize, that that is indeed not the case at all. So we have to really individualize this thought process and this application to, hey, just help you get the most benefit and ultimately prevent you from not having a relapse and recurrence. Again, the last thing you want to do is go through all this work to correct your overgrowth, only to have it turn around and present itself again down the road in just a few months. So this can be a tool to help prevent that. So with that being said, guys, I hope you found the information helpful, and I look forward to sharing more information with you in future videos. Until that time, take care. We'll see you soon.